democratic movement, of a democratic process that had also a formalized instrument, meaning elections, actually quite formalized for a student body election, because it was formalized in a law that was passed by national parliament, and you know, it was quite serious business. And still, I left. So I left. I was suddenly on the other continent. I was in New York, the place of the whole internet development next to Silicon Valley. So I mean, some people even called New York the Silicon Alley. Yeah. So I mean, really, with all the skyscrapers, and so it's an alley, and it was in particular in the media area. So when I saw that Amazon was just coming about to be a good, great bookstore and killing basically the bookstore of the university, I thought, you know, when you can buy stuff online, why can you not vote online? So I started with this first, democratic instrument, so to speak. And I went back and I was asked by the rector then, so if I would be interested to write something about the digital signature card, which was about to be introduced for our university. What can you do with that? And so I went around at the trade fair and I was thinking, what can you fuckingly do with such a card, right? I mean, how do you get people to use such a electronic signature? I mean, it's great, you know, you can sign something with it, you can sign over your life. Okay, I mean, you can't, but almost. I mean, we all know that you can do everything with an electronic signature, what you can do with a handwritten one, a part of getting married, about getting divorced, or buy something that is registered in the land register. Yeah? So that, when Estonia actually always says like there are only 3 things you can't do in Estonia online, then that is based on European law, which is the European Signature Directive, which is based on the German electronic signatures law, which was the first one in Europe that was passed in 1998. But to date, Germany is probably the one country where electronic signatures still don't work, right? I mean, that's a bit of an irony of the whole story, but that's a complete different picture. So when I was about now going about thinking, how can you actually make something substantial, such as an electronic election or an election electronic, I was really starting to become or developing a model of how can you transform a paper-based process to a digital one. So what you start with is looking at the law, and then you think about how can you put all those different steps that you have in there, which on the one side is identifying a voter and on the other side keeping a vote secret. How can you bring that to life? And then I came across an algorithm that was published at my university. So I started to do cryptographic research, and which worked actually quite well, surprisingly well, for how little I know about the advanced forms of mathematics that go beyond what you learn in high school. But it was actually quite a lot of fun. Nevertheless, in the end, what I realized, it is not possible to have secrecy on the internet. The only thing that is possible to have is distribute information in a way that it's very hard to recompose all of those different elements to one whole. And in the end, it's just a matter of resources and a matter of time for how long you can keep that secret. Yeah? So the requirement of eternal secrecy, which is normally connected to elections, is basically bogus when we talk about the internet. And similarly, we need to recognize that anonymity as a requirement is not possible to create, whether that is in an electronic channel or that is on paper either. Because if you have all information, there is no secrecy. Yeah. So why am I saying that? If you go back to a paper-based process and you think about what information, what traces do you leave on a paper ballot, then if somebody has a fingerprint database, there is no secret paper ballot. Yeah. So just to keep that in mind. So when I say anonymity is not possible in an electronic channel, I mean, of course, in the same way, it is also holding true to paper. So the only thing which we can do is with cryptography, with mathematics, to make it very hard. And that actually then led me to this, or getting to the stand that actually voting is not about democracy. Although we always talk about voting as being the celebration of democracy, the day when people come together, but the act of voting is actually not democratic. Yeah? It's about involving people in the process. It's about discussing about your options. That's what constitutes democracy. But of course, when we talk only about the act of voting, that is not really something that we would consider to be something we connect with deliberation, something which we connect with participation. Yet it's much closer to actually service delivery than it is to what we normally call as e-democracy, yeah, where it's about exchanging of opinions, about reacting to what somebody else says, right? And that actually then led me to this general study of e-governance, to the study of how can you actually transform a public administration and bring actually this this very old paper-based established process to an electronic one. And and that really keeps on going and keeps on giving actually. And so I joined the OSCE in the year 2010 as their first advisor on new voting technology, and I got to experience more and more context in which there was this question: how can you actually transform your paper-based process to an electronic one, starting with your elections? Yeah. So in most cases, my job at the OSCE was to dissuade countries from embarking on a quite risky journey of not thinking about, do you actually need electronic solutions to solve your problems, or could you do that otherwise by just manning up or basically get your act together, stop quarreling, stop fighting about who has the power, and actually start reforming your elections in a way that it makes sense, rather than trying to cheat your way into office. Yeah? And very often electronic is just a scapegoat for problems that you have otherwise. It's a bit like with your master thesis or your PhD. If you don't solve the problems in your life, they will emerge while writing a thesis. And that we all know from our own experience, in particular myself, that's something that always keeps you busy. Let's come back to e-democracy. So what I believe, e-democracy is really a catalyst of bringing democratic processes to the people. And this electronic channel, similarly, like all the others, will bring the problems to the surface, which you still have in your basic democratic process. So we could also keep it with Professor Drexler's saying when he says that it's basically the amalgamate of or electronics is just this increasing the taste of your democracy, increasing the taste of your governance model, but it doesn't have anything, it doesn't make your process more democratic. Yeah. So it just intensifies the problems that you have. It intensifies the characters that you have before. So a more deliberate democracy will become more deliberate. A democracy that is flawed, where you basically have an unequal playing field, will just be even more unequal if you use electronics. Yeah. So I mean, if you think about the Russian elections, where the OSCE says basically it has an unequal playing field, in particular because of the contest of the, okay, so my little policeman, yeah, is here again. So yeah, show his police car. Yeah. So basically, when you don't have a fair competition between candidates, an electronic process is not going to make that fair, right? So the electoral process undoubtedly is administered pretty well in Russia, but what we all know is that the competition between candidates is the thing where the manipulation of the elections actually happen, right? I mean, we see it already again, also now with the farce of the referendum, right? I mean, everybody knows that the new constitution has already been printed. Everybody knows it's going to pass. It's just a matter of how much support. And it's not about the democratic process where you really weigh the pros and the cons. So it's really about the phase beforehand that is an issue. So actually introducing internet voting in Russia will not change much to the democratic level of the elections in Russia. Yeah, there is no big danger about that, because all the problems that Russia has with its elections, they will be the same whether or not you use internet voting or not. Yeah. So coming back to that, we are having a crisis of democracy currently, because the pandemic really takes away the opportunity for the face-to-face democracy. It takes away the possibility for people to exchange, for people to discuss, for people to deliberate effectively, and it has to find its new ways, right? And so when we look at the database of International IDEA, which has looked at some 60 electoral processes have been postponed, and still some 33 elections have been held under the pandemic, then it already shows that people feel uncomfortable with with basically the pandemic and the democratic processes. Okay, sorry for the policeman and the siren, but okay, we can live with that. And that has not only to do with Maxi. So, jetzt machen wir das bitte aus. So, kannst du weiterspielen. So people are a bit uncomfortable with this problem that they cannot meet with each other. So they have to find new ways of how to deal with the pandemic. And one way actually is to find ways of ensuring hygienic levels and to use, you know, sanitizer and find ways of actually protecting your election, like the South Koreans have done. And probably we're amongst the more successful examples, not like the French that have just couldn't care less about that when they held their local elections, and afterwards there was a spike in the COVID infections in the country. Then, you know, doing it somewhat like using postal voting is going to be a really costly way of holding your elections, because there is no other more complicated and more complex way of holding an election. And then last but not least, as we called it, the ugly way of holding an election, doing it internet voting. I mean, ugly in the sense of it basically makes it even more complicated. And if you do that on a short notice, then most likely you will just fail, right? If you look at the Estonian experience, which is the only country to date that has introduced an electronic voting channel in all of its election without any restrictions for any voters, then it took them at least 3 years, and that was already on a short notice, basically, to introduce internet voting. And that involved the whole legal debate and everything. Now talking about introducing something in half a year, I mean, that's completely unrealistic if you ask me, right? If we go beyond the small organization as one that we're talking here. So what is the area that really we have to be concerned about? Internet voting is challenging. Yes, internet voting is not going to be an easy one, but I think we should be thinking, when we talk about e-democracy, not about the elections first and foremost. What we should think about the ways that we can provide a platform for discussion, a platform for actual quality exchange of opinions. Yes, Zoom helps us a bit with that, but it's not the way that we really need to exchange. I mean, Estonia serves also as a great platform or a great experience of how not to do it. Yeah? I mean, Estonia is while it's a leader in electronic voting and internet voting, it fails completely on e-democracy, right? So voting doesn't make a democracy. It's about all the e-participative processes. And while there were the tools in Estonia available for introducing like an e-petitioning channel, like an e-petitioning tool, like there is a tool for providing political discussions, all of those initiatives have failed. Yeah, whether it's Today I Decide, whether it's Osale, or it is the petitioning tool, basically it lacks one thing: participation. Yeah, and that is a wonderful paper that Maria Toots, respectively Oles, after her marriage has written, and that was published in Government Information Quarterly. And that really shows you that you don't need a success model, but actually a failure model for e-participation tools to help understand what is really the problem. And in the end, it is just about culture and about leadership and about people that are willing to bring it on for the political discourse. And that wouldn't it not only be the problem that we don't really have the tools to bring people to the electronic process, it's even worse now that we are losing our information channel. Yeah. So with artificial intelligence, with the possibilities of micro-targeting, which at one point in 1999 was called the one-on-one marketing, which Razorfish, one of the first online digital agencies, was really famous about on promoting that. And we have now realized that this is actually a problem, because we're creating micro bubbles, because we're creating micro realities, that we are actually not having the space and deliberation possibility anymore that we thought it would bring, and much rather realizing that the internet is not bringing more information, but more focused information to us, and we're all focusing to more of the same. Yeah? Then this is the area where we really have a problem with e-democracy. So I would even go as far as saying, like, e-democracy is in a crisis, and not because of the pandemic. Because of the pandemic, it will be even more needed that we're starting to realize, how can we make an e-democracy a reality? And if you go back to our e-democracy recommendation that the Council of Europe has started or prepared in the year 2009, which was a remarkable document that also included the element there. E-democracy is not going to make a failed democracy a democracy, but rather it's something that can be applied in any area. And it basically is about developing the instruments that allows people to voice their opinions. What makes an e-democracy this electronic space, this social construct that we all call our decision space. Yeah? So that an e-democracy is not about the representatives that make the decisions for us, but we make it a direct or as direct as possible to make it as Stephen Coleman also called it, a direct representation, to make it a possibility so that we can interact with our representatives and support them. And if liquid democracy is probably one of the most hopeful examples for that, then we still need to bring it on a broader level so that we can actually make it a tool that works. So far, it only works in very specialized settings, but we haven't managed to generalize it, to really make it something that we can call our tool of the future. With that, I'm almost coming to an end, right? So I mean, I'm basically wanting to more to interact with you all and to hear your opinions and your experiences and how we can actually make e-democracy something that can live rather than something that we only write about. Yeah? I mean, the thing that we clearly can say is that e-democracy is not the transformatory experience that people like Benjamin Barber or that other utopists, almost like the creators of the well in the 1980s, has become about. It's also not the place where only we have our dystopy, where we have only the information haves and the have-nots and the digital divide, but more likely it's going to be something that is on a development phase. Yeah, so that's something that probably is going to evolve, but that needs a lot of hard work of us all to make this a reality, to understand what is e-democracy really about, what makes it special, what makes it working, and how can we do it, right? So, I mean, we're still on exploration phase or in the exploration phase. We don't really have the tools that really work great. And e-democracy is not about e-voting, although it cannot be less. If we adapt slightly a sentence by Kofi Annan. And with that, I want to turn back to you, Anna and Dimitro, and let's open the discussion.
Thank you, Robert, for this broad and inspiring overview. I might start with two questions, if you don't mind. Maybe because you had some provocative ideas, I want to have challenge you with respective questions. So you said that e-voting is not like a democracy in its essence, because it's just an act. But what about if we take it broadly, like the stage of, for example, preparing arranging registries? People can express their direct participation by checking them, by monitoring, by practically intervening in the process, or at the end while monitoring the results, well, like at the stage of ballot counting, and again, checking whether everything went fine. So if we take e-voting broadly, can we say that still lots of space for participation? And another question is, you said that e-democracy is just an extension of classical or offline democracy, right? But is there anything specifically digital which is not possible offline? I can throw two things. For example, if it's about voting, you can't unless you have super cameras everywhere to check the process of your vote at the end. But with the cryptography, all these procedures, you can. Or if there is wider democracy instruments, you can't have a simultaneous discussion of hundreds of thousands of people, while digital tools allow to have these chats, forums, this kind of multiple process. So what do you think about these points?
So, I mean, in terms of enhancing an election through electronic tools, I mean, I'm fully on board with that, right? But I mean, you don't need e-voting for that, right? I mean, you can have you're checking the voter lists, the voter registries, and of course you can participate in that. But first and foremost, are those tools being offered? No. There is not really any chance. I mean, we have tried to do that in our Austrian elections, and that was the first thing that everybody thought, why, right? I mean, who cares? I mean, of course you can verify your own list to do it electronically. Yeah, that's a good thing, but verifying everyone else. Oh, we have a problem with data protection. Oh no, you shouldn't be doing that. Yeah. So that's the first thing that gets shut down by the current establishment. Likewise, with the cryptographic means to do universal verifiability. The problem there is that the barrier to do so is so high that you need to have such a good knowledge about cryptography that you're actually programming your own tools, that this is really a minority program. So even in Estonia, right? I mean, the numbers of people that only verify their own vote, meaning using your app on your phone, is less than 5%. Yeah? So people, I mean, there are tools, there are possibilities. Yes, there are many ways of how you can participate, but still, I don't see that it's such a communal, such a social process of what we have it with paper. It is an expert-based tool. That's why it's much closer to a service delivery process that we have in other areas of e-government than a democratic process. It should be one, and I'm fully there with you, but in the way that we have it right now, it's not, right? It's too complicated, it's too elitist in order to be where it should be. And that's probably the biggest criticism that we should be making about electronic voting, and not so much about the algorithms and about the issues around that. And it's a total fair discussion. But I think the real problem is about the democratic aspect of electronic voting. Yeah? And I truly see it as a complementary tool to allow people to participate which otherwise couldn't participate. I think that's where the real strengths lie about electronic voting. It is for people that are abroad, and about creating a community that is able to also include people that are not in the room, not in the place, not in the location. That's where it has its advantages. But where it becomes a bit obsolete is to just bring people that normally would go to the polling station to the online channel. That's where it becomes dangerous. Because what we see is if you get rid of internet voting, you lose the voters. You can move people from paper-based process to internet voting, but you don't manage to bring them back from internet voting to paper, right? I mean, that's what the studies from University of Tartu show. And so basically, that is where an issue lies. Convenient, you know, you basically make it easier for people to participate. And the easier you make, the harder it will be for them to learn to use it the other way around. And it will take more time than the other way around. But of course, it can be a way of keeping people in the voting process who otherwise would drop out anyway. But it's not a tool for engaging new voters that otherwise wouldn't vote, a part of people living abroad. Yeah, and a part of an organization like ours that we're talking about, how could we engage all the members that are in different places? And probably there is no other way than to do it through an internet voting process. Yeah.
Interesting. Once online, always online. So hard to get back.
Exactly.
Okay, we have more questions. Veronica, Stefan.
Is it possible that Johanna is also in the waiting room, because she was here before? But
maybe
I don't
her connection dropped. We let her in, but probably she just.
Okay, good.
Okay, so from my side, really thank you for this. I would not say inspiring, but like punchy words sometimes, because you're saying that, okay, e-voting is not the magic solution. It's let's say it's an argument that sometimes can be used both for the better, but also against those that are at least advocating for this cause. So, but I totally understand the point, and I specifically appreciate the very last remark related to the fact that e-voting at least would be a solution to enable more people to participate, to make it easier for those that usually are somehow restricted, or sometimes governments, particularly in countries that are not so democratic, try to suppress the voting process. And I think that is important. I'm not sure how safe it will be and how all the other technical requirements can be complied with, but I think it is important that this option should be explored, and other alternatives way of voting should be explored than the traditional going to the polls and to the paper traditional voting. But then it would also be the question, you said e-voting is not the solution for democracy and e-government, but then how would it look? As not necessarily an utopia, but as good as it gets, an e-government. What other tools, what other instruments, what other processes should there be in place?
No, I mean, basically, I mean, I'm with Kofi Annan there, right? So, I mean, democracy is not only about elections, but it certainly cannot be less, right? I mean, that's exactly the same thing that I want to say about e-democracy. I mean, e-democracy is not only about internet voting, but it certainly cannot be less than e-election. Yeah? So that's what I try to say. In a sense of when you say like about voter suppression, I'm not sure that internet voting can be a solution for voter suppression, because if you manage to keep people off the elections on paper, why shouldn't you not even do it better in an electronic channel, right? I mean, it's too easy to particularly focus individuals. I mean, now think about combining micro-targeting with suppressing that particular voter when you know that that person is not going to be able to do it. You just need to put in filters. Yeah. So, I mean, if you don't have a neutral internet, then, you know, it's getting really, really tough. And I see too many ways on how this so let's put it the other way around. It is still about the same problems that you have in the real world that you also have in the internet world. And sometimes in particular for regimes that are not so open to hear other opinions, the internet is even worse. You know? The hope that the internet will bring about revolutions, that it will bring more information, has actually proven the other way around. Yeah? It's rather limiting information. It's rather difficult to actually bring a regime down. Sometimes it is possible, but it's not the norm, I would say. I think it's rather challenging. I mean, we see it with China, right? I mean, China is lacking all elements, what we would say is a deliberative democracy, right? I mean, they're only in for the things which bring money. Yeah, I mean, look at all the luxury goods that you can buy in China, but try to find bookstores. Yeah? I mean, it's really hard. Yeah? And similarly on the internet, I mean, all of the things that we know in the West, they exist as a Chinese version, just that the Chinese version is including the censorship. Yeah? I mean, whether we have Facebook, we have Amazon, whether we have I mean, you will always find the Chinese version. So I say that the internet is a very challenging realm for democratic processes, and we need to work hard to make sure that we find the right tools that also work in any democratic setting.
Okay, you have another question from Valentina.
Yeah,
please.
Yes, thank you. My question is the following. Since the start of the COVID pandemic, elections and referendums have been postponed or have required postal voting policies to go ahead in different countries. We will have local elections in Ukraine in fall, and e-voting instruments are discussed now in our country. And one of the biggest challenges is participation of people and voting of people who are not familiar with e-instruments. And I would like to ask you to give some examples from the other countries how to solve this issue. Maybe you will give us some pieces of advice. Thank you.
No, I mean, for internet voting, you need time, right? I mean, you need really a lot of time to implement it. You need to develop the right knowledge inside the country. You need to have the right tools, and you need to be able to run your own elections, right? I mean, that's the real problem that very often is connected to electronic elections, that people believe that they can import democracy, that they can import knowledge from abroad, rather than developing their own know-how and to develop their own understanding, which essentially democracy is about, right? I mean, it's about taking control of the decision-making process from others. I mean, that's what it's about, right? You want to get rid of oppression, you want to get rid of influence from others, and you want to be able to have the unity between the rulers and the ruled. I mean, that's the ideal of direct democracy. Yeah? So if you manage to have the representatives in there, you want to make sure that those are elected in a right way, that it can be controlled, and that you can have that you can trust them. So it really means that you need to have a process that you all trust in and that you all believe in. And so electronic voting actually can take away this trust to some extent. If you don't know in your own country, how does it work? And I think when we talk about the Ukraine example, I mean, I think it's great that you have competence inside the country that is actually proposing its own solutions, that you have discourse about it and how you can develop it. Where I think it gets a bit more challenging is really the identification part. Identification, what we have seen from the Estonian example, needs two drivers. It needs to have something that's interesting enough for the people to start to learn how does it work, which in that case internet voting was, right? So in the first election in 2005, 2/3 of the internet voters were first-time users of the EID card. Yeah? So it was only 2% of the votes which were cast electronically, but of those, 2/3 of them were first-time users of the ID card. So obviously it drove a lot of people to use the technology and to learn how does the technology work. But that's not going to foster the adoption of the technology. What you need to adopt this new technology is something that's useful to them. Something that is useful enough that you can use it on a daily basis. Only then you will learn how it really works. Yeah? So e-democracy can help us to drive the adoption of technology, but it's not going to foster it. We see the same thing in Austria. In Austria, there was an e-initiative process which was initialized in early 2018. And suddenly, because it was possible to support change of laws through an e-initiative, which is not secret, which is identified, we had suddenly a spike in the number of electronic signatures that were handed out. We, for the first time, had more than 1 million cards activated. But those people, they didn't stay as a user. They were lost later on because they couldn't remember the password after a month that they had used during the sign up. So while it's great for people to try out the technology, it's hard to keep them as a user. Yeah. So we need to find other ways. In Estonia, this was electronic banking, where there was a requirement introduced that you need to have at least when you want to transfer more than 400 euros, you need to use electronic ID cards to do so in online banking. So you need to find those two kind of applications in your country in order to bring the identification to the people, so that in consequence you can use the internet voting channel securely, you know, and actually successfully. And that's kind of like the key elements that we need there in order to make that next to this development process inside the country to have a successful way of governing your election process. And that's the key, and for that you need time. I think postal voting is the best, the middle way, so to speak. I think it's terribly costly for a one-time election. You need to think about 2 to 3 euros per voter just to get the vote to the voter and back from him or her. That doesn't include any of the process costs that you've involved in printing it and in managing it and counting it, all of these. Just looking at direct costs, you already have that. So it's among the more costly voting channels. I mean, we have done this study and compared it for internet voting and paper voting in the polling station, which basically shows that, at least for the 2017 election, that internet voting is about 1/3 cheaper than the paper-based solution, 2 euros versus 3 euros. But that basically involves no direct cost, yeah, almost no direct cost. But when we talk about postal voting, which also has in terms of the process levels, we haven't been able to analyze postal voting in detail so far. We have some indications which we'll publish soon, but the ones for really looking at postal voting, all indications that we have is that postal voting is the most expensive voting channel that you could have. So as a quick fix, yes, but it's not easy to do. And probably the hardest, but the most successful one would be to have the social distancing measures also in the polling station. But that also means to have the right access to the sanitation technologies, to the right protection gear for the election workers, to have enough space, to have enough time, etc., etc. So there is no easy solution for COVID-induced problems in elections.
More questions coming. Liliana.
Okay, and Robert, you cannot hear me. Yeah, okay.
Now I can hear you. Now it works.
Yeah, okay. So I haven't had the pleasure to read your research, so it might be that I need to read it first, but in any case, I will dare to ask the question. Have you investigated or done experiments on liquid democracy? Small groups, medium, I mean, what size, what conditions, what is working, what is not working? Yeah.
I myself, I haven't done research on liquid democracy. So, I mean, I only know it out of literature from that, but I'm not aware of a study which has analyzed in detail the different possibilities. I'm aware on the cryptographic level of some work in the Pirate Party in Germany. There was an analysis of the University of Darmstadt by Carolina, I forgot her last name. but I wouldn't be able to tell you right now the success factors for liquid democracy, but certainly it's something that I would like to study at some point in the future.
Okay, maybe I will send the paper on pirate parties, which includes a paragraph on the democracy after the call.
Please do.
Yeah, there is some. Yeah.
I cannot talk. Yes, now I can talk. Actually, that is an area of interest also of mine, Robert. So maybe we need to talk.
Yeah, we should exchange.
We
sure,
should.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Okay.
Just transferring that, I will, as there are no other questions, I will use my time. So linking that thing, liquid democracy, and what Robert said earlier, that for some instruments, the level of access is so high, like people have to be very proficient in using some tools. I mean, what's the problem? If there are people who, let's say, maybe 20 people in the country who can do a really good job, not, for example, on elections, which we sometimes narrow down, but let's say voting on a policy and then can write like whole chapters of a draft law. Maybe it's kind of expertocracy, like digital expertocracy. However, it would be different with what would be like offline, like drawing experts, but like making an online call for like civic councils, online drafting, co-editing things, and people from anywhere in the world can compete, present their like expertise. Of course, then it's a question of whom community like accepts as an expert and professional. That's the question, but still, maybe that's also a good thing to balance like really wide popular voting on really simple things and professional contributions of things which require really narrow expertise. So what do you think about that, about on the technological level and on the normative level?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, those elements are really fantastic, and that's where the internet actually has its great application possibilities, right? I mean, the problem for internet is secrecy, right? I mean, we already talked about that, but that's not a problem for this process. What the internet can do very well is to include people from wherever they are, right? And it also allows to provide good tracking possibilities, good accountability. So actually having a joint editing tool, however that's called, I think that's where the internet works very well. The problem where the internet is not working so well is providing rewards for your work. Yeah. So I mean, the thing that you have about democracy, which is so great, I mean, which we also have when people discuss or criticize internet voting, that you don't have the social process of being recognized as having voted, right? I mean, this I voted that, you know, from the Americans that they bring up wherever. I mean, that recognition is missing. Yeah. Of course, you need to find other ways to compensate for that, but I think that's an area where we could do even more work, how to reward for participation in the electronic democracy process. But where it's very well, it's this joint editing, it's this joint discussion, it's this joint deliberation of how can you come up with great solutions. I think whether that is Discuto.io or there are other tools which help you to find consensus, I think that works very well. I think also the ideas around liquid democracy about transferring expertise to someone else, or basically buying in their vote by delegating yours to them, right? I mean, I think those are all the great tools. And I really commend also the Pirate Party for its approach to have brought innovation to the democratic process about creating and debating and about deliberating. I think that is something that we have long needed, and which unfortunately has lost a bit of the track due to the lack of success of the Pirate Party across the board, right? I mean, that's a bit of the issue, but I think the documentation of all the tools and about this joint developing, kind of like this open sourcing of democracy. I mean, that's essentially what the Pirate Party has made, is really something that we should study more in detail and trying to find out more about. And I find it a pity, right? So that the Pirate Party just got the stamp of being the amateurs of democracy, while they really brought innovation in and pressed the established political parties to open up, to be more discursive, and to provide more accountability to their own working. Yeah, but please, Anna, you can always speak. Yeah. In using the e-democracy services, I mean, what we clearly see is that we have more online discussions, that we have more online meetings, that we have more town hall meetings. I mean, you basically always have, like, when mayors or bosses or presidents reach out, they call it a town hall meeting. Yeah, I mean, so I would say in the one-to-many communication, I think we see an increase. Yeah? I think people want to talk to each other, but where I'm not so sure that we really have more success is the M2M. Yeah, so I mean, the many-to-many discussions, I am not really aware. I don't have any statistics about an increase of those other tools, and if the e-channels have actually taken on. I think we need a bit more observation and studies for that, but I'm not aware of any so far. But that's certainly something we should write a paper about if we get the data.
Yeah, it looks very interesting, especially since the right to association and assembly was limited in many countries. I would guess that people turned into online services to reach to their mayor with the e-consultation process or by launching a petition. I would guess that there was an increase, but it would be interesting to research it. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's something we really need. And I mean, I can tell you just out of, for those of you doing research, I mean, if you have data that actually is in some way relevant, please do publish and do approach me also. So, I mean, what we always need is relevant and rigorous studies of e-participation. I think that's the key thing, and that's what we're interested in, right? Even if it's just for one country, but if you can make sure that the data that you actually have is valid and relevant, then there is always a place for that.
Especially that still 2 weeks left to submit practitioners' papers for the eVote conference, right?
No, that also. I mean, I didn't mean only the eVote conference. I meant more for GIQ.
Yeah.
For the Government Information Quarterly, I mean, which has a rolling submission. But for eVote ID, of course, I mean, practitioner papers, that is very welcome. And there you don't need to be rigor for that submission, but there you only need to be relevant. And also it can have been, it doesn't need to be original either for the practitioner submission.
Okay, Mariana, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I am.
Cool.
Hello.
Thank
you, Dmitry, actually, for the dissemination of this seminar, because it was for you that I heard about it. And thank you so much, Robert, for your talk. I'm sorry that I had to join late. My apologies for that. But I really would like to hear from you, Robert, regarding one specific question that is a conceptual one. Regarding the participation concept, and this comes from a discussion that we had in the context of a workshop during the Digital Transformation and Global Society Conference last week, and we gather some people around and had this discussion, and we realized that there is a set of researchers that are concerned right now about the concept of e-participation and its actual use currently and specifically in the current context. Do you think that e-participation is a concept that needs to be revisited and to be studied and to do some research around it in order to reflect better the current situation we are living in, or is that something? It is something that you think it's okay?
No, I mean, if you go back to the definition or the understanding of e-democracy as Anne McIntosh has coined it, right, back in her 2004 paper at Higgs, then basically it's along the line of the policy cycle. Then it's pretty much all about e-initiatives, about setting the agenda, about actually discussing what are the best implementation options. But then it basically stops there, and it talks about, like, the decision making is e-voting, and then the evaluation again is e-participation again. Yeah? So that's a bit of the understanding. Then we have to say that e-participation has become really, really good when it comes about agenda setting, right? I mean, whether it's Fix My Street or other tools that is about raising awareness, I think that's where it really works well. But wherever it talks about co-production, where it talks about co-creation, where it talks about actually generating social capital beyond just meeting, that's where it doesn't work. Yeah, where it's not working well enough, and where all the problems of the internet comes in with our biases, with our problems that we are not able to really be representative, where it's the problem of making sure that people are really on board, where it is actually activating the already activated. You know, all of those problems that we see with the internet, they come to play when it's about the real collaboration. Yeah. So it works well when it's about one saying like, this is a problem, others supporting it. It works well when we're trying to provide the accountability. It works well when we try to deliver the service. Well, when it's about collaboration, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, that's where we are really lacking, and where participation, and that's why I'm coming to that problem that e-democracy really, we don't really know how to make it work, right? I mean, the big discussion back during the e-democracy recommendation discussion in 2007, 2008, 2009 was about how do we measure quality of e-democracy? Yeah, I mean, in the end, it comes down to the same issue about how can you quantify and how can you qualify participation? How can you say like, this contribution actually is good for our process? This process is really actually providing more quality to our democracy. That's all the same issue, right? We don't know how the contribution can really work. How does the co-creation really work? Is now the use of open data sets, is that going to be, and develop a new service out of it, is that participation or is it not? I mean, it certainly is somehow co-creation, but is it about democracy? Only because many people participate? Probably not, right? So, I mean, it's all about this element of making sure that the ruled are also the rulers, yeah? And that's still a gap which we cannot handle and cannot overcome at the moment without the help of representatives, yeah? And so, for me, e-democracy, e-direct democracy is still an utopia. Yeah? Still something that we need to work on, and we don't know how to do it. Yeah, but I mean, feel free to try to talk more to Morten and to convince him a bit. I mean, he's also a former Estonian resident. So
okay, we have let's have like the final round of questions. So sure. Valentina is using her right for the second time. Cool. Please.
Okay, thank you. My question is about such kind of instrument as e-petitions. This instrument is rather well developed in Ukraine now, especially in the times of pandemic. And you know, a lot of populists use this instrument too. And sometimes we have very, very strange petitions from my point of view. I would like to give you two examples. For example, one of the petition is about prohibition of distance learning. People ask President of Ukraine to prohibit distance learning. Another example is people ask President of Ukraine to prohibit COVID testing and COVID vaccination. And my question is, do you have the same problems and same issues in your countries? And what your point of view, how to fight this populism in this time of pandemic? Thank you.
I mean, e-initiatives, e-petitions, they always have this problem that sometimes minorities try to gain or they try to abuse the platforms that they have been provided with populist ideas and with marking, you know, coming up with those, how should I say, shortening of issues. Yeah. Sometimes they actually manage to gain traction. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem of populist movements. The only thing you can do about it is provide more information, provide more knowledge, provide more critical discussion. I mean, that's what we know, how to counter populism. But I mean, who has the time? Yeah. I would say still e-petitions is the only tool that really works well. Yeah, I mean, it's again around agenda setting. It's around providing input to the discourse. That works relatively well. the issues, I haven't observed that it became so polemic in e-petition process. I mean, in Estonia, the e-petitions don't work at all. For a funny reason, nobody really cares because nobody thinks it's really needed. They use Facebook instead of that, and public postings in Estonia work much better than posting something on Osale. But that's different. I mean, it's a particular setting, and the context always matters. And in the Austrian setting, there is not that issue about this populist or junk initiatives. I mean, there it's just in general the problem of populistic initiatives that are just launched by political parties. Yeah, I mean, so that is an instrument for the established representatives in the political process, and so that's an issue or a common feature of both offline and online democratic channels. But in the end, I think I mean, I hope to things like the democracy room. Yeah, so the democracy room is an AI bot that actually tries to do fact checking automatically by using the internet. And similarly for those initiatives, I mean, that could be something that could help us with all the problems that we have with AI. Yeah? About the biases and other issues. Yes, please, back to you.
Gregory, did you raise hand or?
Well, yeah, I just I was involved in e-petitions and initiatives. In fact, I just now starting a new European citizen initiative for legalizing file sharing.
Much needed.
Yes, it's admitted by the European Commission on the June 15, and we have now time to start collecting signatures from until 15th of November. But what I was saying, like, this needs to be admitted. So in Germany, we have e-petitions. Everybody can submit petitions to the Bundestag, but they have some kind of filter. So the stuff that is like racist or very populistic stuff that's really not, that contradicts some laws or have budgetary topics that are too deep into the competences of the parliament, those are excluded by the initial control of what is admitted. And I think this is actually not that bad. I would be interested more in the initiative about, because the petition itself is just only, okay, it's a agenda setting topic, but sometimes it just goes very unnoticed. And usually the body that it's directed to only like requires, okay, we adhere to that, but they don't need to take any action, even if that may be millions of signatures involved. I would be more interested in experiences with initiatives, because in my city where I live, we're just implementing new rules for quite low barrier for citizens to submit initiatives, and I'm just not sure it will be used. But
by initiatives, you mean that they actually become law if they get enough support, or what do you mean by that?
No, they've been introduced into the parliament for not as a hearing, but actually as initiative right for the parliament. So like
but still agenda setting,
forward.
Yeah?
Yes, well, a little bit more than that, but yes.
But what is the more? That's what I was trying to identify. So what's the more than just setting the agenda for the parliament?
Well, the petition, as we have it in Germany, only got a hearing, so the parliament doesn't get to vote on it. So the political parties don't need to position themselves.
Okay.
Yes, the initiative is lead to debate, to counter propositions, and to a voting in the end. So the people can see how political parties are actually positioned on that. So it is more.
So then I understand the difference. Yeah. Okay, nice. No, I mean, I think very often it's also a matter of definition, right? Like in the Austrian case, it's only the hearing. Yeah? I mean, it's only the petition. Basically, it's not beyond that. In Estonia, I mean, it was really just about same agenda setting. It was not having the parliament didn't have to vote on it, on the original proposal. Now it's more a tool for deliberating on law proposals, for discussing about it, how to improve the laws. But it's not so much for voting on it. I'm not aware of a connection between an process and the parliament really voting on the proposals. Neither in the German Bundestag model, I mean, which is based on the Scottish model. So it's really more on the petitioning. So I'm not. Are you aware of any national parliaments doing it?
Well, not Bundestag. Some some regional parliaments in Germany, like Bavaria, have a very strong way of doing it.
But connected with an electronic channel?
No, I think they're not. Bavaria is very the opposite of. They require the signatures to be notarized actually by the city hall.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, but people are used to that, and they're still very successful in collecting it.
Okay.
Okay, so the questions have finished, and we took an hour. Everything's at the end. So there are so many challenges we discussed today, but there are some cases which do work. So what about if we do crowdsourcing, like exchanging the publications, which touch the things we talked about today? So please send them to Alliance or to me, and I will compose a list and send to all registered participants so that we have something like post reading. And another thing, all the people on the call are really kind of professionals in the field, doing it in one or another way. So this is what we kind of had the idea of Alliance, again, co-production. So maybe, so some people here are members of Alliance, some are just interested. So my suggestion is you can sign up to our newsletter or write papers, share news. You can submit to become an expert of the Alliance as well, because that's a kind of professional association. That's the idea. We kind of get our efforts together and get something more that we can do individually. So we'll send link afterwards, and you're welcome to follow our updates and share news. And thank you very much, Robert, for this really good discussion. Really, really kind of intellectual, insightful, and engaging. Thank you very much. It was nice to see you here, and let's see you in other events.
Let's build on the social capital we have here.
Right.
Thanks a lot.
Nice.
Thanks a lot. Talk to you all, and thanks for participating and inviting me.
Thanks. Bye.